it's really what I like to do if I have any free time. Like I don't know, like I hate games. Like I'm the person who never wants to play cards or play a board game. Like I just, in my free time, I really like to make things.
That's your passion.
Yeah, there's some degree of just like liking to do productive things. Like I like to make things. I don't know. I was definitely like, I was always a kid who just drew a lot, and like, you know, I had one of those 80s childhoods where nobody had any supervision whatsoever. And so I remember like my best friend and I, we did a lot of very involved creative stuff. Like we invented very elaborate board games where we drew every single thing and like made, you know, hundreds of cards and like things. So we did things like that a lot. You know, there was a fairly vibrant artistic community in New Bedford at that time. Like UMass Dartmouth took over a smaller art school called Swain School that was still in existence when I was growing up, and so my parents were friends with a lot of art people from Swain School. So I definitely spent a lot of time, like I did a lot of pottery on a wheel because my mom had two friends who had kilns and potter's wheels in their basement. So like I had the experience where it was just like, if I was messing around, we could actually fire it. Like, and my mom was in an arts collective for a while with a lot of her friends who were craftspeople who, like, she had a silk screen in her basement, so silk screen whenever he wanted it. My mom is very crafty. She is a nurse, but she became a nurse in her 50s. You know, she had, like, I think her degree is English and Women's Studies. You know, she had one of those college degrees, and then she worked in a library. She worked in retail. She had a lot of like non-career jobs to make money, and then went back to nursing school. So she's a nurse, but in her own time, she's one of those people who's always knitting and quilting and making, like, she's never, and I don't know if this is just like a choice for herself. She's never done fine art. She has always done like some degree of practical art. My parents were not officially artists, but they are, like, my dad owned a bookstore for 40 years, but he was, he didn't make any money at all at the bookstore. It was a labor of love entirely. So he was also a art model at UMass Dartmouth for about the same period of time. That part of the installation that I mentioned before was part of the UMass Dartmouth put on a big show after he died of paintings of him, because they estimated he had taught 8,000 art students to draw, because he was a legendary and beloved model at the UMass Dartmouth art department. So he was definitely art tangential. He had very fond memories of when he went to UMass Amherst, of working at the art gallery at UMass Amherst. Like, those were some of like his life things that he really liked, that he remembered very fondly. So he was very hard to please, but he was proud I went to RISD. Like, that, like, as far as like status things he cared about, it's certainly like if I had become a lawyer, he would have been mad at me, probably. Like, if I had made a lot of money, he would have been so disappointing and judgy. But he was proud that I went to RISD. A lot of people at the opening said he, like, still, like, you know, 25 years later, that he talked about it a lot, how he had a child who went to RISD. Like, that was impressive, too. I grew up in New Bedford, which is near Providence, so I had always vaguely had an idea of going to RISD. Like, we went on trips to the RISD Museum when I was in school, and being from New Bedford, which is about a half hour from Providence, that was we went to Boston a lot too, but we definitely, as a kid, went to Providence a lot. Like, it was a very familiar space to me. Like, my parents took us to the zoo and the Salvation Army down there, and I knew the area. So it was definitely always on my radar as a school. I ended up initially in college going to Simon's Rock in Great Barrington, which is the early college, just because it was the early college. In high school, I looked at several private schools and then ended up going to Simon's Rock. But at Simon's Rock, I became pretty clear that I wanted to go to art school, so I transferred into RISD my sophomore year. And I was very boldly sure I was going to RISD. I applied to RISD early decision. I didn't apply anywhere else, and I didn't... you know, I accepted before I got the financial aid stuff through, which I never would. I did have a full scholarship to RISD, but I never would have gone if I hadn't had the full scholarship. So in retrospect, the confidence I had that it was all going to work out was wild, but I was also only 17. But that was always where I wanted to go. So I went to RISD and I graduated from RISD. I went to RISD for painting in the 90s, but around that period, very few people in painting were painting. Like, traditional painting on canvas was very, very out in the late 90s. So I did a lot of work with found objects. I did a lot of big site-specific constructions was a lot of what I did in school, which when you graduate is very difficult to do because you need funding and, you know, like your senior scheduled show coming up in order to do like large site-specific, like you need somebody to want to see it if you're doing site-specific installation and performance. So I didn't do a lot of work for the first couple of years coming out of school. And then I switched back to more traditional painting for a while because that's just a lot easier to do when you have a full-time job and are working on the side. And I still like to paint. I'm not anti-painting. It was very exciting for me for a while post-school to be like, wow, you know, it's kind of fun to put paint on a canvas and make pictures of things that you see. Like, that's pretty nice. And so I've done a lot of that. And I had a show a couple years ago that was just all food paintings, so it was just straight up pure representational, like paintings of actual things that existed, and that was very nice. But in recent years, I have definitely gone back to just gluing stuff together because it's something I really enjoy, and I have just a natural desire to collect things. When my dad died about a year ago, and when he died, his apartment that he had lived in since I was little, so for 40-something years in the same little apartment, was so much like an installation on its own that a local artist actually built an installation out of it. Like, there was an art show where somebody meticulously, like with my sister and I's permission, took as many objects of my dad's as possible and built a very inactive installation because he just collected things and arranged things in various particular ways. And so I have a tendency to acquire found things, and then I have too many things, and I have to make things out of them to make the things go away and not just sit around being things, which is where a lot of it comes from. Probably very obviously, I love Robert Rauschenberg. Like, the first time I saw Rauschenberg's in person, it's just like the like audacity to glue a taxidermy chicken to something in the mid-50s. I love it so much. It makes me so happy to think of the sheep in the tire to just do that when like non-representational painting was even a big deal, but then to just like be collecting things from thrift stores and just gluing them onto things. Like, I love that so much. I have never made things that were fully three-dimensional. I used to make things that were a lot like bigger, but they were always on a flat surface. I use a lot of fabrics. I really like textures. So for a long time, my collages were only traditional collages, as in that there was paper and print media. But I've never been a particularly precise artist. Like, my painting is pretty gestural, and I don't enjoy the really tight, like, precise collage where you're using tiny scissors. Like, I've always much more enjoyed ripping things, because when I'm actually constructing things, I like to work pretty fast. I really don't I like the collages people make where they're very careful, but it's not what I do. And so I found moving away from paper was actually helpful in that sense. Like, when I do cut things, I like to just do it very, very roughly, and just like precision is not what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to work as quickly as I can to get the result I want, and I like accidents. Like, I really don't want to be precise in a way that controls accidents, because I feel like seeing what will happen is very interesting to me. So I don't want to know too much. Like if I'm trying to construct something and it doesn't work, maybe something else will work. I will frequently have a set materials and some idea of the aesthetic, usually color-wise. A lot of people think my colors are completely random, but they're not. It's just my color sense is unique. But I will, like, a lot of it, when I pile materials, a lot of it is color. So I go back and forth between the materials being purely visual and what they might mean. Like is this pumpkin just a pink object, or is it supposed to be a pumpkin? Like, I would like some degree of both. Like I try to really hold like the duality of this is filling a space where I need like a object of this shape and this color, but you can still see that it is an object that holds narrative meaning. Like if I am going to glue a skeleton onto something, I don't want it to appear that it's just meaningless that it's a skeleton. I mean, and I think that's true of more traditional painting too. Like you're still composing the scene. Like it's not just like, is there a tree there because it's balancing, like, you know, the composition. It's also a tree, but you are balancing a composition. And that's, I mean, that's definitely like the pieces I've been doing, like they are fun for me. Like it's fun for me to solve the puzzles and try to construct things and figure out how, like, that's why I set little rules where it's just like there'll be something from category A, B, and C in every one of these 3 pieces, and it's going to have to balance somehow. Most of the pieces in this are not really officially series, but I almost never work on one thing at once because of the way that mixed media works. Like I like to have 2 surfaces because you're cutting things and I like to separate things and put them in different places. Like I really don't like, if I feel like if I work on only one surface, it gets too busy very quickly. Like because if I'm liking the thing and I want to put it somewhere, I need to have lots of places to put it so it doesn't all get cramped in one place. And I've, in general, always liked to work on multiple things at once so it doesn't get overly busy to me. And I will get obsessed sometimes with using all of some material that I'm working with, and so if I have more than one surface, I can at least spread it out without cramming everything into one thing. Some of them are pretty big, and they're very visually loud. I think they're going to need a bit of space from each other to look at. It's all mixed media. It's everything is on a panel, so they are like flat, somewhat 2-dimensional things hung on a wall. Like nothing is. I wanted to make boxes, but I never got around to constructing boxes because the actual construction is not my strong. Like real construction is not my strong point. If it can't be done with glue, I don't do it. But I think they, as the time went over, they get increasingly like out from the flat space, and they're very colorful, but I'm mostly using spray paint, so it's a relatively limited color palette. There's a bit of a graffiti element. I had never used spray paint before, and I loved it. It was super fun. I am really excited about actually making some more 3-dimensional things. Like I feel like I would like to take any feedback I get and actually like push myself to do the type of construction that I'm not especially naturally good at. Like I want to do some light box types things. Like as the things got bigger, I realized they really didn't belong on a flat surface. But as I was coming to the end of doing the stuff for the show, I was like, this is not the time to pivot and do like this needs to be finished as it is. But I'm definitely, and I really, really want to push the lack of purchased materials further. And locally, we're actually pretty lucky because for a town this size, like there are actually like Looky Here does things that like are open to kids of any age, which is great, and like they're also really not forcing people to do anything traditional, which I think is great. Like we have and then they do things over at the Great Falls Center in Turner's all the time, and I think there are definitely organizations doing things for young people where they're not holding a very firm idea of what art is real, which I think is great and super fun. Like if you want to just glitter paint to a piece of paper, that's great. And like this year, my kids submitted stuff to the Franklin County Fair for the first time, and they will take anything for the youth for the Franklin County Fair, and they welcomed like my 6-year-old's little like cardboard to me. Like he could bring in a coloring book page if he wanted and be proud of it and have like a ribbon on it. And I think that some kind of appreciation of he was just like, I could do this and have it be seen and looked at, which is just like awesome at 6. I do think both seeing other people's art and getting feedback from other people helps. Like, I think artists being around artists is extremely helpful, and seeing as much art as possible is extremely helpful, but especially being around artists in their studios, I think, versus the finished project for me. Like, I really changed my work, I think, in my junior year at RISD, and the way the junior studios are set up, everyone is basically in cubicles, so you're very close to other people. You don't have full walls. You have like your little half walls, and like everyone is right around you. And junior year is the big year at RISD as far as projects that are important to your grade. By senior year, you're kind of getting ready to leave. So your junior end of the year is when, so people are working around the clock that that year. So I definitely changed a lot of what I was doing just by always being in the studio, like at 2 o'clock in the morning with like other people who were in the studio at 2 o'clock in the morning trying to finish things. I feel like the value that I would take from those years is mostly just peer interactions, of just being in the constant company of people who cared enough about what they were doing that they had bothered to actually like apply to RISD and get in. So like they would, you know, it was a reasonably dedicated group of people, because that's not easy. I don't really recall, especially in the painting major classes, that we really had our all of our professors were working artists. You know, like mostly critiques were facilitated, but I don't recall like a huge amount of formal instruction, because I think most people were of the philosophy that that's unhelpful. You know, some of it is practical opportunity. I think, like, it's very difficult to do immersive art because you need space. So it depends on how, like, you know, in school it's very busy. It's very easy to do that sort of thing. You're just like, I'm going to use the such and such space at this time, and I'm going to schedule it. I'm going to do this because there are spaces that exist for, you know, for your use in that. And it's a lot of work to do that out in the real world. My initial application is all paintings. I didn't even, because I transferred, I didn't really explore other majors, because when you apply as a transfer, you apply into a major. So I'm not sure what I would have, RISD, your freshman year, you just do foundation classes and you explore other majors in your major, which I'm not sure what I would have done if I'd had that experience. It probably would have been painting, but, you know, plenty of people, like, surprise themselves in their freshman year, and they're just like, I didn't even know I could really be a filmmaker. I'm a filmmaker now. Or, you know, like, I definitely know people who ended up in RISD animation who just, you know, in high school it doesn't even open your mind that that's what you're going to do, and then you take an animation class and you're just like, wow, like, that's, you know, like, most of the time I was in school, I was dating a film student, so I knew a lot of the film, animation, video people. Maybe I would have done that if I had been a freshman there, but I wasn't. So you apply into your major, and then it's, you know, to switch majors at RISD means adding another year, and it's very expensive. So nobody does that. It was probably more like 10 years ago, because it was before my kids were born. But where was it? It was a space in Hadley that I think no longer exists.
And was that your first show, or you said you did some work in college as well? Yeah, I had a show at the old APE space in Northampton, like ages and ages ago, when APE used to be at the top of Thorns. Back in the olden times, back when Northampton had a really good like monthly arts night out. I feel like that has fallen off, but it used to actually be like pretty good, and a lot of people participated. And I had a show at the Forbes Library once in their upstairs space. That was the Forbes show. The APE show was mostly painting, and I remember the Forbes show I was actually working on more collage-y stuff, and they didn't like it, and after I hung it they like pushed back, and I had to like put up more older things rather than new things, because they didn't want the collage-y stuff in there. And I had a show in the basement of the there was an art supply store on Main Street in Northampton, and for a while they had a little gallery in their print and mark me. I had a store down there because a friend of mine was the manager of that whole space. So tell me about the work that you're going to show at GCTV.
This is a combination of a while of just like finding weird moments and like making little things, and it's much more three-dimensional than I've been doing for a while. Like, I've been trying to, I sometimes have trouble making things that have no purpose, especially if they're large. So I've been trying to make, like, so I tend to not allow things to take up space, but I have made things that take up space. and it will be nice to show them. But they're definitely just a collection of, and I've let them get more three-dimensional, which has always been my impulse, but I sometimes curb it to store, to store things, and But they are much more experimental, and I've experimented with just construction and how to use found object stack. Like there's just been a lot of work in getting things to stay. Part of the reason my workspace looks so crazy is I tend to just collect things without editing. And although it looks just like an insane nest in there, I try to spend time in there. That's where I try to just read, and I try to go in there even if I'm not feeling like working, and just be around. And then I definitely sometimes deadline and pressure is good, but sometimes if I have to do something, I don't feel it at all. So going in there to just read an unrelated novel is helpful sometimes, and then I will get up and start taping things together and start thinking about what I'm doing. I definitely do rearrange my piles a lot. Just these. I tend to work too when I'm actually constructing in multiples. I like sets. I like every one of these three pieces has to have a component of this, this, and this of the piles. It's very messy the way I work, so I do tend to think about something a lot before I actually construct it. I tape things a lot. I will just think about stuff and tape it together and think about I use a lot of duct tape. There are a limited clause of things that I allow myself to buy new, even though it's cheating. I would love to only use found objects, and I have a coworker who we talk about this a lot, about what things you could use to replace, because she likes that idea. But it's just you have to have some. There is no good solution for glue. You can't. It's very hard to construct things without some base materials. But I would with more time to really work on things that everything was found. Janice and I really like to brainstorm. How could you make adhesives? The visual aesthetic is exactly what I like. So there is no what I'm collecting is just a completely random assortment of what visually appeals to me. It is absolutely my own visual language there. When I look at an object, I see potential, definitely. At some point last fall, there was a box of porcelain dolls by the side of the road, and I pulled over the car, and I was immediately thinking about breaking them with a hammer and gluing them back together. That was the which I have done, and it was very fun. But that was the impulse behind it. Is I'm going to break these dolls and see what the little pieces look like. But the object is the key as a visual thing. I don't want these porcelain dolls to exist, but there's something about them visually that I enjoy. But it's not random, because I don't like everything. You do. There are a million objects that I would see and have no desire to break them and put them back together. There are seasonal things. For a while last fall, I was gluing a lot of the husks of chestnuts onto things, because you see them everywhere and they're cool. And it was really fun to figure out how to work with them, because they're sharp and they're round and they don't stay on things very well. So getting chestnut husks to adhere to things was a fun challenge, and they look cool. But part of it was just I like to walk a lot, and so I think about things in my head while I'm walking. So some of it is affected by just repeated visuals when you're walking around, which is why I think about trash a lot, because you see, if you walk in town, or even if you walk in the woods, you just see things all the time. I used to take pictures of random food in the street a lot, just for my own personal use. There was a muffin I watched decompose around the corner, where it's a whole muffin, and then it was the cycle of this muffin that was sitting in a curb on the street. I like to use my own photos in collages a lot, although that gets pricey if you want to print them in a way that the paper quality is not horrible. I don't like to use when you print them at like a CVS or something, they're horrible. So like I do like, sometimes I print things that way and then I photocopy them and I use them that way. I do like to use my own images, but then that goes back into the like setting control things on collage, because if I'm taking the photos, they can be anything I want and I don't have to find them. The theme is somewhere around trash art. It's definitely, like, in my studio I just keep like a wall of things taped up, and like that's purely fun, to cut things out of a magazine and put them up with duct tape and like think about them. Like that's the fun part, is just like all the stuff, moving around all the stuff in my studio. Just like there's a lot of shelves in there, so also just like moving around the actual objects and putting them into little groups, like that's fun. Then I have to figure out how they're going to like adhere to things, and if they'll even really work if they're permanently combined. You know, like the stuff in my office is not permanently combined, so it's no pressure. Especially when I'm using print media, which I do sometimes. As I'm working, I start to figure out like what words go with what. I do like to use words, but it kind of comes to me as I'm working, what words go with what. And once something is put together, I tend to go through a phase where I start covering things, because I realize that some of the things don't make sense to what eventually happened. It's just like, oh, like I put that there back in the beginning, and that no longer is coherent to where this went. So I do a lot of cover up. So there's definitely layers, and I wouldn't want there to be I wouldn't want to it to be too clean. Like I wouldn't want the previous layers to not be there. I wouldn't want it to be too plain, because I like the cover up part of it. It's just visually, I like textures, so I like there to be cover up. But a lot gets glued on that is then hidden. I try to really like set time that I'm just going to make a big mess and do it. And because it is so messy what I do, once I like am doing it, I want to get everything I need to get done before I stop and clean up, because it's a production. So that's part of it, where it's just like once the glue is out, like, I'm gonna and I do a lot of work outside. So if I have hauled everything outside, then I'm going to do what I need to do before I haul everything back inside. I feel really excited to get an outside reaction of any kind. Like I'm not sensitive to negative reactions, because you can't be, because everyone has an opinion about everything, even if it shouldn't be opinion based. So like in art, you're meant to have an opinion about it. When I started making art, doing like fairly personal performance art pieces, like in some ways like. It is all a personal narrative, and I do believe being public about personal things is helpful to people, in people finding common ground in some way. I think the titles are a hint, but my art philosophy is not to tell people what to think about it. This work is pretty new, but again, it depends on how open you are to mixed media art. You know, like some people don't like art that's not paintings. Some people love that sort of thing. you know. But that's true of all art. You know, like when I did this show of just watercolors of food, some people were like, "Why is it all food?" Like, I hope in some ways that people think like that it's fun to do whatever you want. You know what I mean? Like I do feel like art is intimidating, and that there is some degree of non-traditional art. Is like my kids all make collages because that's what I do. But I feel like, you know, it's fun for them to see that, like, well, why don't I glue some leaves onto this, and then I'll like cut up a magazine and I know that kids do that anyway. But I think that like my kids really see it as like what art is in a way that they might not otherwise, where it's just like it's what you want to make.